This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of April 22nd, 2024. Alongside my tag team partner, Matt Mascardi, I'm Damian Rollis. On today's Countdown, Keurig, Dr. Pepper's fizzy and unhealthy CEO succession, Exxon Mobil's anti-shareholder rant, simple majority voting proposals outperforming Caitlin Clark, Liberty Energy's board says no to shareholders who also said no, and on the big vote, the proxy cage match at Norfolk Southern Corporation. Let's get right to our trade wire. At electronics manufacturing company Jabil, CEO and director Kenneth Wilson has been placed on paid leave pending completion of an internal investigation related to corporate policies. Of course, they're not telling us anything about anything at this point. Wilson has been CEO for less than a year and has two sons who are employed by the company. Jordan Wilson is a business unit manager and Adam Wilson is a business unit coordinator. CFO Michael Dastor is now interim CEO, while former CEO Mark Mandello continues as executive chair. So that's what's going on at Jabil. Keurig Dr. Pepper's do-over succession plan will be complete tomorrow, April 26th, as Robert Gamgort will step down from his position as CEO once again, but remain with the company as executive chair. The new CEO will be Timothy Kofer, who is getting a Golden Hello bonus consisting of $7 million in equity and $8 million in cash. The latest change follows a botched CEO succession in 2022 when Gamgort first tried to step down. That plan was thwarted, however, when the newly named CEO Ozan Dokmachoglu suddenly stepped down, forcing Gamgort to be reappointed as CEO. No members of Keurig Dr. Pepper's board were held accountable for this, which may be one of the severe limitations of a combined CEO and chair, or a board where the chair is an executive and a former CEO.
He was the first time the executive chair also, right?
Yes.
So
Well, he was CEO and chair. He tried to transition to executive chair, and then he had to go back to being CEO and chair.
Maybe the problem is
Him?
that he's still around.
Maybe the problem is that
he's
he's overseeing the board that oversees himself and the succession planning at Keurig Dr. Pepper.
Let's keep a running list of problems.
Avalon Bay Communities Director Susan Swansea joins the board at Digital Realty Trust, and B&G Foods Director Deborah Martin Chase replaces Joanne Epps on the Gaming and Leisure Properties Board. Joanne Epps passed away in September. Those are our lead stories on the trade wire. Let's move over to our proxy cage matches. Well, it's not exactly a proxy cage match. Our big vote at Norfolk Southern is our proxy cage match for this week. I wanted to mention the ongoing battle at Exxon Mobil, where management and directors continue to berate its shareholders. As part of the company's 2024 proxy statement, the board dedicates a full 3-page preface to its 2024 shareholder proposals, which we've never seen before, explaining why it hates shareholder proposals, despite claiming to, quote, support and encourage investor engagement and advocacy. This highly unusual move follows the controversial tactic taken by Exxon earlier this year to sue its shareholders, Arjuna Capital, and Follow This, rather than leveraging this SEC's no-action process, which is how you normally deal with shareholder proposals that you don't like at first glance. Exxon Mobil blamed that decision to sue its shareholders on the, quote, ongoing abuse that businesses across all industries experience from the misuse of proxy proposals. Other highlights in this 3-page preface include the following complaints: that over the past 2 years, proposals have been submitted to ExxonMobil seeking more than 19 new reports, including 13 such proposals that are or were on topics the company already covers in its reporting. That 140 proposals have been submitted since 2014, 50% of which are by serial proponents, that's its term, And Matt, that up to $21 million in direct costs to the company have incurred because of these proposals. Although this figure is not actually based on ExxonMobil's own accounting, but was conjured instead based on SEC estimates of up to $150,000 per proposal. So this isn't actually the number that the company actually spent. It's doing some fuzzy math.
I like that.
Right?
Not are they doing the fuzzy math here,
because we don't know what they really spent on this.
That's $21 million since 2014.
Since
that's
2014.
not even 1 year of the CEO's compensation.
And I can promise you that if Exxon spent even a penny over that $21 million figure, it would have reported that, and it would have not taken this earned income credit that we all take when we're doing our taxes and our charitable deductions, blah blah. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. Exxon also calls out the Interface Center on Corporate Responsibility, that's ICCR, Proxy Impact, and As You Sow, among others, saying that many of the proponents and representatives work with each other or other activist organizations and hijack the shareholder proposal process to advance their own agenda, which often conflicts with growing investors' value, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the best responses by ICCR is actually a chart that shows since 2017, the number of climate-related shareholder proposals that got more than 30% yes votes from investors. In order to get 30% yes votes, you need actual support. You can't do that in a vacuum. And there's a bunch of them. I mean, there were 4 since 2017 that crossed the 50% threshold. So clearly, as much complaining and vetching as Exxon wants to do and suing their shareholders largely agree that these reports are useful at less than the cost of a single year of CEO salary. I don't understand this. And the worst part about it to me is that on the board of Exxon is Jay Hooley, who was the ex-CEO of State Street, one of the largest investors in the entire world, who's suing investors for putting up shareholder proposals. What are we doing? Jay, what are you doing? Why is this even a conversation? You should end your tenure on the Exxon board immediately as soon as they attack shareholders that you were that shareholder. State Street, you don't get to greater than 50% on a proposal if State Street isn't one of the companies voting for it. Meaning, you want shareholders to stop doing proposals that you agreed to most likely in the past. You need to get over yourself. You can't okay this from Exxon's management. Either step down or release a statement that says, I'm not on board with this, even if they're doing it.
Let's move over to our vote results table. AGM season is in full swing, but before we get to our large cap companies, let's start with a ridiculous director vote at a smaller cap company. Shareholders said no to Director Ken Babcock, a majority 51% voting against his reelection. The board, however, quote, determined that Mr. Babcock's continued service on the board is in the best interest of the company and its stockholders.
A zombie.
In the best interest of the same shareholders that just voted out the director. On top of that, the board actually attempted a feeble excuse for Babcock's failed reelection, citing, quote, a recommendation from a proxy advisory firm to withhold votes based on its disagreement with the company's classified board structure and a 2/3 stockholder vote to remove supermajority provisions. I don't understand that excuse. And why? Because why then did shareholders reelect both CEO Chris Wright and Director Audrey Robertson, who are also up on the vote this year? CEO Chris Wright is also the board's chair, so that seems like a better target if you're upset at board proceedings. And Audrey Robertson serves as CFO at a company that engaged in $200 million in related party transactions with Liberty in 2023. So despite that, shareholders really did seem to want to remove Ken Babcock. Let's be clear here.
Yeah, this would be the weirdest protest vote
Right?
ever. Like they picked the one guy who makes no sense to protest.
I'm not
against.
saying I'm not saying they didn't have a reason. I'm just saying that they had other reasons. It's not because exactly.
Yeah, but
Thank
that's
you.
what I mean,
Yes,
right? Like
yes, exactly.
it would make no
Exactly.
sense. You clearly have something to protest
Yes.
against that guy.
I find it odd that a company even puts an excuse in, but to have a failed excuse, like a meaningless gobbledygook excuse, makes it even worse. 20 large cap companies, we usually focus on large cap companies here, were held at AGM votes. They held AGM votes over the past week, while most represented disengaged and or happy shareholders. I use the air quotes for that. The following votes were noteworthy. First, let's start with John Chevedden's simple majority vote proposals. They've been on quite a roll recently, passing at Humana with 51% support, passing at the Sherwin-Williams Company with 71% of the vote. And how about this one? A huge victory at Revity for a simple majority vote shareholder proposal with 96% support.
Wow.
Despite the board recommending against the proposal. I don't understand that one at all. How is that possible?
I don't know. I mean, like, do we know what Glass Lewis and ISS recommended?
Does it matter? 96% support?
I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot percent. Yeah.
And second, Say on Pay votes struggled at both Carrier Global and Broadcom, where 40% of shareholders voted against pay proposals at both of those companies. Broadcom CEO Hock Tan received a ridiculous $162 million in compensation this year after receiving an already ridiculous $60 million in both 2022 and 2021. And at Carrier Global, shareholders are probably pissed because the board snuck in an off-planned supplemental equity award for CEO David Gitlin, consisting of over 2 million shares and options with a grant date value of well over $100 million. So that's what's going on at AGM votes. That brings us to the big vote for the week of April 22nd, and that is Norfolk Southern, which, Matt, I know is already exhausting you, where there is a massive proxy contest going on. I don't even know where to start with this one, but maybe I should let you start with. I have a few things I want to add along the way, but why don't you go ahead with this one?
I mean, by way of short background, this is a company that's been underperforming like every possible TSR metric.
To put it in the context, this Norfolk Southern is the company which experienced the disastrous derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, in the winter of 2023, and there have just been ramifications from that derailment, not only for the residents of the town, but for the company in general since that point, ultimately ending in a massive proxy contest from Ancora Holdings.
Ancora, yeah.
Ancora, which is not only proposing a slate of directors, but also is proposing a complete management reshuffle, which is
they actually
unusual.
have nominated a new majority to the board so that they could get a new CEO and COO in there, right? Like, so
Right.
for Ancora, it's a bit of a binary. You're not going to get your CEO if you don't get the majority of the board. So their whole process here is a management flip. You would flip the majority of the board, you would flip the CEO, you would flip the COO, and inevitably CEO and COO would bring in their own people over time. You would flip the entire management team of this company most likely in the next 5 years. And
let me tell you why this is important, and I do want to highlight this before I forget because it also highlights our data, our great data. In times of turmoil, we often see companies and boards make strategic decisions that we don't quite understand, right? They often will immediately let go of some directors, often some long tenured directors. They'll immediately bring on some new directors, mostly to appease the market, to appease shareholders. But again, there's no actual strategy in place. They're just kind of making knee jerk reactions. But I want to show you what that really means in practice. So what Norfolk Southern did is it immediately retired, for lack of a better word, 4 of its directors. So
right.
Thomas Bell, Stephen Lear, Mitchell Daniels, Michael Lockhart will all be gone as of the 2024 annual meeting. And what this does, in fact, So we have a number, we have a quantitative data point that demonstrates the influence of directors on these boards, and what it does is remove a total, I believe, of 37% of the board influence left.
Yeah,
When
needs to be replaced.
When Norfolk Southern made that decision. And what it did, we ran the numbers for how the board's going to look as of the 2024 AGM. And what that did is it shifted the power very clearly into the hands of 3 directors. In fact, they used to have 29% of board influence. They will now have, as a triumvirate, they will now have exactly 50% of the board's influence, which means they now control the board more than they ever did before.
Right.
And this is CEO Alan Shaw, existing chair Amy Miles, who's been there since 2014. Who's staying, and nominating committee chair Jennifer Scanlon, who again predates the derailment in Ohio. So all this did was it didn't change the board. All it did is basically consolidate power into the hands of people that
with management, basically.
Right, exactly. So this is the real effect of these types of decisions. And
that's why they do that. They
Yeah,
wouldn't do that if there wasn't a slate coming in, or they didn't think that there was one coming in, or there wasn't a disaster like in East Palestine, right? Like they do that in response to these things to look like there's motion on the board. But the real effort is maintain the status quo and just the appearance of refreshment. Boeing did the exact same thing.
Well, let me say this, that we talked at length about CEO Alan Shaw at another one of our podcasts earlier this week. We cited the article by Yale professor Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, who has a lot of praise for CEO Alan Shaw. Despite all that, despite my perspective on that article, at a minimum, I would say that if you are going to retain CEO Alan Shaw at Norfolk Southern, the sound corporate governance move that I think Jeffrey Sonnenfeld should be pushing for if he wants to keep CEO Alan Shaw is to immediately remove Alan Shaw from the board that provides oversight to himself and to the new management that he's hired, because otherwise there's just no way of ensuring that there's accountability going forward, right? Alan Shaw should not be on this board anymore.
Let's start with the recommendations.
Okay,
then.
go ahead.
Because that is my first recommendation. I think the first vote is no to Alan Shaw. Forget slates, forget anything else. If you want to make a statement, send a message to management that the status quo and the old culture vibe that NSC has, you want them to start focusing more on safety, have fewer accidents, more efficiency, using data, and like going into the future of railroading, then the vote has to be to remove a lifer from Norfolk Southern, who is now the CEO. He's been there since 1994. His background isn't even in the engineering and railroading part. It's in marketing, sales, and some operations, right?
Yeah.
You remove him from this board. You don't have to stop making him CEO,
and
but
that's
you
the
do
important
remove him from the board.
And that is the important point here, because to be clear, by voting him out of the board, you're not firing him as CEO. Let the new board that he doesn't control decide that, right? So it's not
exactly.
So in fact, where I did speak out against Sonnenfeld was that this is not a deeply personal attack. This is not a vicious way of handling corporate governance. This is actually a very sound way of separating the power at Norfolk Southern. If anything, this might ensure greater success for Alan Shaw, right? I mean, to have a board actually overseeing his duties. But yeah, go ahead.
And the risk here is if you just removed Alan Shaw, what you're left with is a board that consolidates his power with the chair, who in this case is Amy Miles, who's been there since 2014. She's the CEO of Regal Entertainment. I don't understand.
In fact,
when we look at the data, the qualifications that Amy Miles has to sit on this board, other than the fact that she's been on other boards before, is that she's directly connected through second degrees to other board members who used to be here. In fact, I would call it the Wick Moorman crew. The 2006 to 2015, Wick Moorman was the CEO of NSC and brought in a number of people that are all highly interconnected. In fact, I refer to Norfolk Southern as the Boeing of land travel, where you have CEOs who are bringing in their people who are all connected on other boards with one another onto their boards. Amy Miles is a vestigial organ of that.
Yeah,
You do not want to consolidate power with the old guard. So the other top line recommendation here is vote no to Amy Miles.
It's a crazy choice. I mean, you're talking about a woman who, as you pointed out, is the CEO and chair at Regal Entertainment Group of all places, and she's the chair of pharmaceutical company. No, she's on the board of pharmaceutical company Amgen and The Gap.
Yeah,
I mean, this is old-fashioned logic, old-fashioned corporate. This makes no sense. I'm sorry, I just don't see this. I don't understand.
And then finally, I would say no to Marcella Donadio, who mostly because on pure performance metrics, everywhere she's been on the board, poor safety is the norm.
Oh, is that right?
Which means, and she's been on the board of a number of energy and extractive companies, which means if you want to change culture, you need to start removing. She's also connected back to the Wick Mormon crew. You need to start removing these little pieces of old culture from the boardroom and from the management team, but that will happen at the board's discretion. Remember, the reason why we focus so much on the board is investors are electing these people to help oversee management, hold management accountable. This is your lever. You want them to represent you, not an old guard of American aristocracy boards where they pat themselves on the back by swapping board roles. That's not what you're looking for.
Another reason why we cited that article earlier this week is what it did not do was it did not analyze the Norfolk Southern board,
a single person,
nor did it analyze the potential incoming slate of Ancora, because as I'm sure you'll talk about next, there are some names to consider. I'm not saying that shareholders have to take the entire slate. Because because to your point, Matt, if you do the very simple and logical move to boot, again, you're not firing Alan Shaw as CEO, but to remove him from the board, you no longer need 7 dissident directors. You only need maybe like 2 or 3, right?
Which is my recommendation at the top line is vote against 3 of the Norfolk Southern directors, including the CEO as one of those 3.
Alan Shaw.
Take him off the board, not
and
out
a chair,
of the company.
Amy Miles.
And you're going to support 3 Ancora slate directors that make sense, that actually create it's enough to start creating a new culture. And the people I'd recommend are Bill Clyburn Jr., who was an ex-regulator. He's regulatory focus on safety. Sami Fahmy, which is a railroad advisory experience. So actual railroad experience on the board, bring that back in. And Allison Landry, who's on the board of XPO, which is a logistics company. She's the closest thing you have to some version of high-tech logistics that you can add to this board. But we can get to them in a second. Underlying these recommendations is a tremendous amount of data and analysis. We looked at everything. We looked at all their performance metrics, their connections to one another, the cultures where they came from. And what we found was, well, first and foremost, what we've set out to say is we can agree that Norfolk Southern needs basically less accidents. They need stronger community buy-in. They need to be more efficient, and they need better data. They need to operate on data in a way that they doesn't seem like they have in the past, based on all of the metrics. I am not a railroad expert. I'm not going to talk to you about precision scheduled railroading or PSR, whatever it is. I'm not going to talk to you about. What I can talk to you about is the performance metrics that are obvious. Between 2012 and 2022, accidents went up over 100% for Norfolk Southern.
Okay.
Over 100%. During that time period, Alan Shaw was the head of intermodal ops, right? Like part of his job is overseeing the operations of some of these things. That's not refutable. In Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, the Yale professors, he made his own slide deck for all of Norfolk Southern. He shows that accidents went down in 2023. Well, the accident in East Palestine happened in February of 2023.
Right.
If accidents didn't go down in February or in 2023, there would be not only no question, everyone would be fired there, right? Like the only time they focused on safety and accident reduction was after the largest train accident in the United States in recent memory.
Right.
Of course, you're going to see it go down.
Yeah, and the reason why we're focusing a lot on this article on this that he put out in Fortune is that we couldn't quite figure out why. You know, he doesn't cite a connection to Norfolk Southern, although we did notice that Norfolk Southern filed that article as part
in
of
support of themselves
in its SEC filings. It is now officially cited, yes, as a document in support of its own slate of directors, its own proxy statement. But again, we're not quite clear why.
Well,
like we're not clear where this came from.
Ancora,
Right? Did they pay Sonnenfeld? Like what's going on here?
It hasn't been disclosed, but Ancora actually filed a follow-up to that in which they reached out to Sonnenfeld twice, and they got no answer from Sonnenfeld, but they got an answer from an advisor to Norfolk Southern, basically on Sonnenfeld's behalf, which they used as evidence that there is some relationship between Norfolk Southern and Jeffrey Sonnenfeld at Yale that is not disclosed as part of the article.
Yeah. We just want disclosure of that. And it's funny that you mentioned Boeing at the top of this segment, because let's not forget that it was not that this is about Sonnenfeld, but let's not forget it was Jeffrey Sonnenfeld who also wrote an article praising David Calhoun, who has now been removed, will be removed as CEO of Boeing, but praising him for his laser focus, as are his words, on safety at Boeing after all the issues happened. It's the same situation. Like, it's bizarre. It's really bizarre,
there is a
honestly.
Weird cult of like the big swinging U.S. CEO. There's some weird cult going on, and they all are highly interconnected, which I think is part of this, right? Like the Jeffrey Sonnenfelds of the world, whether or not it's him or someone else, there is a certain beholden industry. He's he's doing management training of CEOs and executives, and if you ostracize yourself from those circles, right, it's going to be really hard to access them. So even if there was just a social impetus, there's some clear impetus to protect these CEOs, but in this case, it largely isn't warranted. Unless
he's, there is some disclosure that will come out that he's working for the company. But again, the reason why we stayed to these shows and stayed to this research is that we are trying to demonstrate that there is a quantifiable approach to these arguments. It doesn't have to just be based on your feelings or who you like or who you've talked to behind the scenes. I mean, there are ways of creating a strategy based on actual like analytics in creating a new path forward for these boards, right? Other than like ISS saying that we think this one's better, or we think that one could be better, or perhaps this person is smarter, or
perhaps
anyway, go ahead.
Well, in this case, right, we can start with the management themselves, right? Because one of the questions that we ask all the time is, what are the skills of the people involved? And we'll ask it of the management of the board, and we'll say, are these the people that we want to bring this company into the future? We should ask that every single election. That's what you ask when you vote for president or governor or your local town council, right? Is this the person that I want to represent me into the future? And in this case, it may not be, because when you look at the executives and what their skills are, what their backgrounds are, just even by title, they are super heavy at Norfolk Southern on legal and counting the money. Basically accounting or finance or something like that. 12 of the 22 listed executives have backgrounds in law or lobbying or tax and accounting. That's more than half of the board, who spends all of their time effectively trying to get you in compliance or lobbying or talking about legal issues, and counting. Doing accounting work.
And to your point, current chair Amy Miles, who we cited as being the former CEO at Regal Entertainment Group, became CEO by first being the CFO.
CFO. She was in
right.
accounting.
So
She has
to your
a background
point,
in accounting.
right? And
This is like and this is what you see. Actually, we saw the same comp at Boeing that we see here. The culture got replaced. It was a culture of engineering that got replaced with finance, money, accounting, law. We're seeing it not just on the board of NSC, but in the management team first, where the jobs include there's a head of tax, there's a controller, there's a treasurer, and a CFO, and an internal auditor.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people do you need to basically do Quicken, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I get,
at some point,
I mean, this very clearly suggests that they have two gene pools basically that they're picking from, and
That's right.
they refuse to do any work beyond those pools.
In fact, when you're talking about gene pools, it gets even worse because 10 of the 22 of the listed management team on the website have 20 plus years experience at Norfolk Southern.
Insiders,
Eight of them are lifers. They've never had a job outside
Right.
of Norfolk Southern, meaning culture is of Norfolk Southern, not today, but over the last 20 to 30 years is embedded in them, right? Like that's all they know. So you're going to ask people who all they know is Norfolk Southern and the culture that got them to this place, to the East Palestine derailment, to like poor performance overall, lagging their railroad peers. You're going to ask them to be the ones to lead the pivot, lifers there.
And let's not forget, this is not all about the East Palestine derailment, because you cited figures that what is it, between 2014 and 2022, their safety
was the worst
doubled.
of the industry peers. It doubled. Their accidents.
So this is
doubled.
not just about that event in 2023.
And the people who lead this company are as parochial and monoculture as it can get. 50% of the executives went to Virginia colleges, mostly UVA. And I mean, we're talking about not that large a state, but you are a massive corporation. You're a S&P 500, Fortune 500 company. You can hire anybody you want in this country. And I know you were based in Virginia for a long time. That does not mean you have to get every one of your people from Virginia. Half of the executives went to Virginia colleges. 78% are white, 78% are male, 63% are white male.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to choose the talent that's closest to you.
Yeah, it's a reluctance to rely on any network beyond the ones they feel comfortable in, right?
And yeah, go ahead.
No, and I'm going to say that, and that's ultimately what this is about, is that to create a strategy based on board refreshment is not an aggressive tactic against existing directors. It's a way of opening up skill sets, adding skill sets, opening up new networks, right? This should not be characterized as a negative thing. I mean, what Anchor is asking for, suggesting, to quote Jeffrey Seinfeld again, it's not a vicious attack. You know what I mean?
No, it's not a personal attack.
It is just a way of kind of loosening up an old boys network that might not be benefiting shareholders at Norfolk Southern or beyond shareholders, stakeholders of Norfolk Southern, right?
But even when you're talking about adding skills, and here's the evidence that the team that's in place, both on the board and in management, may be the wrong team. This is a group that has a history of sort of fudging the skills. Michael Lockhart, who is stepping down, retiring, he's being replaced on the safety committee. He was the head of the safety committee by Christopher Jones, who joined the board in 2020. Now, Lockhart did not have, according to Norfolk Southern's own disclosures, safety listed as an expertise of his until an Ackman-backed activist went for the CN went for a takeover of NSC in 2015. As soon as an activist came in, all of a sudden Michael Lockhart had safety experience. Now maybe he took a class, great, sure, possible. But in 2020, he was made the head of the first safety committee, and he stayed the head of the safety committee until now. Accidents went up the whole time, right? So it's not exactly like his safety experience was helpful. Now you have Christopher Jones taking over, who in 2021 not listed as having safety experience. In 2022, not listed as having safety expertise. In 2023, not listed as having safety expertise. In 2024, he's named the head of the safety committee. And all of a sudden, he goes from Christopher Jones to Dr. Jones.
Yeah.
Yes, he has a PhD, but now you're disclosing it. In response to Ancora, he's given a doctor in his title, and safety is mentioned 15 times in his bio, and he has safety experience.
Look, and look, the only reason why we follow some of these weird trails and dive into these rabbit holes is because when we see a pattern of behavior, like for instance using Sonnenfeld's research but being very unclear about the relationship, or like people going from Mr. to Doctor, or having safety skills and not having safety skills. It also led us to dig into their Wikipedia page, which we did, and notice that that suddenly there's a very neat section about all these safety improvements going on at Norfolk Southern.
Only improvements.
All added by one Wikipedia user named Joey McIntosh, who we're not really clear who he is because he's not actively involved with other Wikipedia entries. But there is some kind of a strange culture of disclosure going on at Norfolk, where it's kind of holding on to like the last vestiges of creating defense against its old boys network, right? Like
It's
they're not
really weird,
they're not
like
kind of owning up.
Disclosure.
They're not owning up to some of its failures and moving forward. They're staying in the past.
And my guess is what they don't want you to see is that on this board, Norfolk Southern board members have added $5.9 billion in cap value over their respective tenures relative to their influence on the board, while the average rail sector director groups have added $19 billion. They are underperforming by 3 times the average director. They have okayed dividends and buybacks at 7 times the rate they've spent on safety. The estimated 2022 spend on safety was $1.2 billion. Meanwhile, $2.8 billion in buybacks in 2018, $2.1 in 2019, $9.7 billion since 2018 in total buybacks.
That might suggest why they have so many accountants and former CFOs on their board.
Yeah, that's what they're counting, right?
Right.
Quarterly dividends themselves have increased since 2017 per share, and they target actually 40% of earnings paid out to investors directly. This is a group that does a really great job of not having you focus on salient issues to ongoing things in favor of short-term things like buybacks and dividends. And it's not just that, it's a group that's highly interconnected with one another over time, right? Like, so we can see board loops that go back. Over the history of this board, there are a few boards that have as many loops back. Boeing is one of the worst sort of Templars of this, where you see these members sit on other boards with one another, and it always comes back to them, which gets us to the slate, right?
Okay.
And here's the question about the Ancora slate. Do they actually solve the problem of that Norfolk Southern has? Because Ancora has put out a tremendous amount about new strategy and that these are the people to execute it. Now, I don't know what railroad strategy is the best strategy.
Sure.
It's not my job. But I can look at the slate and ask some of the same questions that we ask of the Norfolk Southern board. What we see on the slate is people who are, in fact, one who dropped out, who Jeffrey Sonnenfeld wanted to imply dropped out for like suspicious reasons.
Yeah, there was no evidence to support that. Yeah, he said perhaps that's the reason why she left, because because Ancora represents a train wreck or something. And he actually used that, and he used those puns. He used
those terms.
He used derail puns. He used great train robbery puns. He's basically, making fun of the residents of East Palestine with his corny jokes.
Well, that notwithstanding, the director that dropped out is Nelda Connors, who's sitting on 4 boards currently.
Yeah, it's already too many.
I think the reason why you would drop out is pretty obvious if you're adding a 5th board, right? Like it becomes too much. That said, Betsy Atkins is on 5 boards currently, right? Like, why are we putting up Betsy Atkins on a slate? She's a super boarder. She's an 18-year history on boards.
She's from a VC firm, so maybe she just represents capital.
Which is fine. I'm glad she's probably great at her job, and that's why you want to choose her. But there are other people that you can choose. They chose Bill Clyburn Jr., who's an ex-railroad regulator, Senate counsel. He's a government wonk. He's DC-based government wonk. That's great. I think that he's one of my votes for. I support that that director. Sameh Fahmy, an ex-CSX advisor, and he was at CN SVP, so he's railroad experience.
Yeah, they have representatives from CSX Corporation, from Canadian National Railway, from Amtrak, from Rumo Railway, all kinds of industry experience.
Allison Landry's on the XPO board. She's my other four. But you also have, they put up John Kasich, who's the ex-governor of Ohio, ran for president, and Gilbert Lamphere, ex-CSX board and CN board.
And co-founder of Mid-South Rail Corporation.
Right. That's pure railroadism right there, right? Mm-hmm. And you know what they solve really well? Ancora solves there's not enough rail experience on this board. But what they don't solve is that it's comprised of, this is a board comprised of interconnected directors, right? This is the replacement board. Actually, the new CEO would be from UPS. The COO would
Jim
be from
Barber,
Yep. And the COO would be from CSX, right?
Jamie Boychuk,
But two of the slate members, of board members, would also have backgrounds from CSX. So we're replacing some level of interconnectedness at Norfolk Southern with CSX and CN interconnectedness, right? Like, I'm not sure that that's what we want necessarily either, because in the time frame that Norfolk Southern had an 111% increase in accidents, CSX had a 53% increase in accidents. Norfolk Southern had a 23% increase in employee injuries, and CSX had a 39% increase in employee injuries.
Well,
I'm not sure what you're replacing there.
This is why I think the strategy from the beginning is the strategy that this is why we're here, Matt, is that instead of electing the entire slate at Ancora, you focus on your choices, which are Bill Clyburn, Sameh Fahmy, and Allison Landry, and you remove the CEO, Alan Shaw, from the board, and I think you have a pretty fair compromise right there.
That's the takeaway to me. The hybrid approach is the best approach.
Yeah.
It is remove the vestiges of the past now, and this is a multi-year process, right? Once you wait a year and see what you've got, because eventually next year, what should have been on this slate is not precision railroad. It needs to be data. It needs to be AI. It needs to be people who think outside of some of that box too. You want the railroad experience, the engineers, but you want to mix it with other experience types, particularly modern experience types, not just rooted in all railroads from the last 50 years. We're talking about it like we're trying to innovate on something that was like the biggest in 1880, right? Like, it's time to add new fresh blood to these boards. So my final recommendations for the board is the hybrid approach. No Alan Shaw, no Amy Miles, no Marcella Donadio. Yes to Bill Clyburn Jr. from Ancora. Yes to Sameh Fahmy at Ancora. And yes to Allison Landry at Ancora.
And again, what this does, before we wrap up, I want to just remind the audience that what this does is it breaks up the consolidation of power that is now in the hands of Alan Shaw and Amy Miles, right? By removing some directors from the board, you're not. Yes, you're appeasing the market, but what you're really doing is not moving forward, is not creating avenues for new strategy and innovation. You're really just consolidating power with a man who's been there since the 90s. So it's not the intended effect that shareholders think it is. So I think it's a good strategy. I think we've said enough about Norfolk Southern. If you want us to weigh in about their shareholder proposals or say on pay, reach out to us. We'll do that for you. But for now, I think that's plenty.
I'm exhausted. I'm going to go take a nap now.
That's the Proxy Countdown for the week of April 22nd, 2024. Join us next week when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool. Forever on the lookout for shareholder sharks, floating band-aids, and wayward directors.